Breanna Washington had just finished a 12-hour shift at Detroit General Hospital, saving 3 lives in the emergency room. At 26, she was one of the youngest EMTs to be promoted to senior status, following in her father's footsteps of serving the community. But at 12:47 a.m., as she slept peacefully in her apartment, police officers burst through her door with a warrant meant for an address 3 blocks away. Her father, retired police captain Marcus Washington, would arrive 30 minutes later to find his only child dead from friendly fire. If you believe in justice and accountability, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Breanna Washington was everything her father Marcus had hoped she would become. At 26, she had her mother's gentle spirit and her father's determination to serve others. While Marcus had protected the community as a police officer for 30 years, Breanna had chosen to save lives as an emergency medical technician. She lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment at 1274 Elm Street, in a quiet neighborhood that had been gentrifying slowly but steadily. The apartment was filled with medical textbooks, plants she somehow managed to keep alive despite her hectic schedule, and photographs of her with Marcus at various police department events throughout her childhood. Marcus had been both father and mother to Breanna. Since his wife Diana died of cancer when Breanna was 12, he'd attended every school play, every soccer game, every graduation. When Breanna announced she wanted to become an EMT, Marcus had been prouder than if she'd said she wanted to become police chief. "Dad, I want to save lives, not arrest people," she'd told him during her senior year of college. "But I still want to serve the community like you did, baby girl," Marcus had replied. "Saving lives is the most important service there is. I'm proud of you." That Tuesday evening, Breanna had worked a particularly difficult shift. A car accident had brought in a family of 4, and she'd spent 6 hours helping the trauma team save the parents and 2 children. She'd arrived home at 11:30 p.m., exhausted but satisfied with the day's work well done. She'd called Marcus, as she did every night after difficult shifts. "How was your day, Dad? Better now that I know you're home safe. How was the hospital? Saved a family today." The youngest was only 8 years old. "Reminded me of someone I used to know who always wanted to be a hero," Marcus had laughed. Even at 26, Breanna could still make him feel like the most important person in her world. "Get some rest, baby girl. I love you too, Dad. See you Sunday for dinner." Those would be the last words they ever spoke. Because 500 yards away, 5 police officers were preparing to destroy both their lives. Sergeant Rodriguez's first instinct wasn't to call for paramedics or check on the victim. His first instinct was to check the address. When he realized they were at 1274 instead of 1247, his blood went cold. "Coleman," he hissed, "we're at the wrong house." Detective Coleman rushed outside and confirmed the address. They had just shot an innocent person in her own home. "Okay, listen up," Rodriguez said, trying to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond any possibility of control. "We need to call this in properly. This is a terrible accident, but we followed procedure based on the information we had." Officer Mills, still shaking from firing his weapon for the first time, looked at the victim and felt his world collapse. "Sarge, she's wearing scrubs. She said she was a medical worker." "Oh God, what have we done?" "We've done our job based on the warrant we were given," Rodriguez replied, already formulating a story that might protect his team. "We announced ourselves. She moved in a threatening manner in a dark apartment, and we responded to what we perceived as a threat." Officer Hayes knelt beside Breanna, checking for signs of life, even though it was clearly too late. "She's gone," Hayes whispered. As they waited for supervisors and investigators to arrive, Coleman made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Mills, your report is going to say she reached for something." "Hayes, you saw her make a sudden movement toward what could have been a weapon." "Torres, you heard her shout something that sounded like a threat." Mills stared at Coleman in horror. "But that's not what happened." "That's what happened. Unless you want to be responsible for destroying 5 police careers over a tragic accident." At 1:15 a.m., Marcus Washington's phone rang with the call that would end his life as he knew it. "Captain Washington, this is Lieutenant Davis." "Sir, there's been an incident involving your daughter." Marcus was dressed and in his car within 3 minutes, his mind racing through possibilities. Car accident? Medical emergency? He'd been a cop long enough to know that late-night calls about family members were never good news. When he arrived at 1274 Elm Street and saw the police cars, the crime scene tape, and the shattered door of his daughter's apartment, Marcus felt something die inside his chest. Lieutenant Davis met him at the perimeter. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. There was a no-knock warrant served at this address. Your daughter, she didn't survive." Marcus stared at the man who had been his subordinate for 12 years. "What do you mean? A warrant served at this address? Breanna doesn't have so much as a parking ticket. She's an EMT." It appears there was some confusion about the address. The warrant was meant for 1247 Elm Street. Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. "You're telling me that officers from my department broke into my daughter's home by mistake and killed her?" Lieutenant Davis couldn't maintain eye contact. "That's what we're investigating." But Marcus was about to discover that this investigation was designed to protect the officers, not find the truth. Detective Ray Coleman was a 15-year veteran of the Detroit Police Department. He'd worked under Captain Washington early in his career and had always respected the man's dedication to proper procedure and community policing. But Coleman had also developed some habits that would have disappointed his former captain. The warrant they were serving was for 1247 Elm Street, the suspected location of a drug operation run by Kenny K. Rock Roberts, a small-time dealer who had been selling cocaine and heroin in the neighborhood for months. The warrant was legitimate, based on weeks of surveillance and controlled buys, but Coleman and his team were rushed. They'd been called in on overtime, it was late, and everyone wanted to get home. When Coleman's rookie partner, Officer David Mills, mentioned that the numbers on some of the houses were hard to read in the dark, Coleman had waved off his concerns. "I know this neighborhood," Coleman had said. "1247 is the third house from the corner. Let's move." Officer Mills, 23 years old and 6 months out of the academy, had been trained by Marcus Washington in procedure and protocol. Marcus had taught him to double-check addresses, to verify targets, to always confirm before acting. But Mills was intimidated by Coleman's experience and didn't want to seem uncertain in front of the veteran officers. The team consisted of Coleman, Mills, Officer Jennifer Hayes, a 10-year veteran, Officer Michael Torres, 8 years, and Sergeant Paul Rodriguez, 18 years. All of them had worked with or been trained by Captain Washington at some point in their careers. At 12:45 a.m., they positioned themselves outside what they believed was 1247 Elm Street. In reality, they were outside 1274 Elm Street, Breanna Washington's apartment. The apartment building was a converted duplex. Breanna lived in the upper unit, accessible by external stairs. The building's address numbers were indeed difficult to read in the darkness, partially obscured by an overgrown tree that the landlord had been promising to trim for months. Officer Mills had brought night vision equipment, but hadn't used it to verify the address. Sergeant Rodriguez had a spotlight, but hadn't illuminated the building numbers. Detective Coleman had a GPS device that would have shown them the exact location, but he'd relied on his memory instead. At 12:47 a.m., they breached the door with a battering ram. Breanna Washington woke up to the sound of splintering wood and shouting voices. Still groggy from sleep, wearing the same hospital scrubs she'd been too tired to change out of, she stumbled toward her bedroom door, trying to understand what was happening. "Police, search warrant." Breanna, confused and terrified, called out. "Wait, there's been a mistake. I'm a medical worker." But in the darkness, with adrenaline pumping and expectations of finding armed drug dealers, the officers interpreted her movement and voice as a threat. Officer Mills, the youngest and most nervous, fired first. Officer Hayes, startled by Mills' gunshot, fired second. In the span of 6 seconds, 32 shots were fired into Breanna Washington's small apartment. When the gunfire stopped and the lights came on, they found a 26-year-old EMT in hospital scrubs, lying in her hallway, surrounded by medical textbooks and get-well cards from patients she'd helped save. What happened next would expose just how far some officers would go to cover their mistakes. Within 4 hours, the official story was set. Officers had served a legitimate warrant at what they believed was the correct address. The victim had made threatening movements in a dark apartment, and officers had responded appropriately to perceived danger. But Marcus Washington hadn't spent 30 years in law enforcement without learning how to recognize a cover-up. The first red flag was the speed of the official report. In Marcus's experience, officer-involved shootings required extensive investigation, witness interviews, ballistics analysis, and careful reconstruction of events. This report was completed in less than 6 hours. The second red flag was the lack of body camera footage. All 5 officers claimed their cameras had malfunctioned simultaneously, technical impossibility that no one seemed interested in questioning. The third red flag was the refusal to let Marcus view his daughter's apartment. As next of kin, he had legal rights to access his daughter's personal effects, but the scene was being kept sealed, pending investigation. Marcus called his attorney, David Chen, a former prosecutor who specialized in police misconduct cases. David, I need your help. My daughter was killed by police last night, and they're already covering it up. Marcus, I'm so sorry for your loss. Tell me what happened. As Marcus explained the circumstances, David's expression grew increasingly grim. Marcus, this isn't just negligence. Wrong address, no body cameras, rushed report. This is criminal conduct being covered up by institutional protection. What are my options? Legally, you can file wrongful death suits against the officers and the department. But Marcus, you know how these cases go. Qualified immunity, internal investigations that clear the officers, settlements with non-disclosure agreements. Marcus was quiet for a long moment before responding. David, I spent 30 years teaching young officers that the badge means something, that we serve and protect innocent people, that we're held to a higher standard. I know you did. Those officers killed my daughter through negligence and are now lying to cover it up. If I don't fight this, what does my badge mean? What did my 30 years of service mean? Marcus began his own investigation that afternoon. He drove to 1247 Elm Street, the address where the warrant should have been served. The house was clearly abandoned, with boarded windows and an overgrown yard. No drug dealer had lived there in months. He then drove to 1274 Elm Street and examined his daughter's building. The address numbers were visible with a flashlight. Any officer taking basic precautions would have been able to confirm the correct address. Marcus obtained copies of the warrant application and discovered more disturbing information. The supposed drug operation at 1247 Elm Street was based on surveillance that was 3 months old. The informant who had provided information about the address had been deemed unreliable in previous cases. Most damning, the warrant had been rushed through the system without proper review. A judge had signed it based on Detective Coleman's representation that immediate action was necessary to prevent destruction of evidence, a claim that had no basis in fact. Marcus realized he was looking at a pattern of corruption that went beyond his daughter's death. What Marcus discovered next would prove that this wasn't incompetence, it was criminal negligence, with a cover-up that went to the highest levels of the department. Using his contacts within the department and his knowledge of police procedures, Marcus began investigating Detective Coleman's recent cases. What he found horrified him. In the past 2 years, Coleman's unit had served 47 no-knock warrants. Of those, 23 had resulted in no arrests and no evidence found. 8 had been served at wrong addresses. 3 had resulted in injuries to innocent people. The pattern was clear. Coleman was using no-knock warrants as a shortcut to bypass proper investigative work. Instead of conducting thorough surveillance and building solid cases, he was kicking down doors and hoping to find something that would justify the violence. Even worse, Coleman's supervisors knew about his pattern of mistakes, but had protected him because his unit had high arrest numbers that look good in departmental statistics, even though many of the arrests were later dismissed due to lack of evidence. Marcus also discovered that Officer Mills, the rookie who had fired the first shot, had filed a report immediately after the shooting that contradicted the official story. Mills had written that Breanna had identified herself as a medical worker and had made no threatening movements. This report had been lost and replaced with a version that supported the official narrative. Marcus arranged to meet with Officer Mills privately. The young officer was devastated by what had happened. Captain Washington, I am so sorry. Your daughter, she didn't do anything wrong. She was just scared and confused. Tell me exactly what happened, son. Mills broke down as he recounted the events. She called out that she was a medical worker. She was wearing scrubs. She wasn't threatening anyone, but Detective Coleman is saying we have to stick to the story that she made threatening movements. Mills, I trained you. What did I teach you about integrity? That the badge means nothing without it. And what are you going to do now? Mills looked Marcus in the eyes. I'm going to tell the truth, Captain, even if it ends my career. Marcus felt a mixture of grief for his daughter and pride in the young officer who was willing to sacrifice his future for honesty. Son, doing the right thing might end your career in this department, but it's the only way to live with yourself. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He called a press conference, standing on the steps of City Hall, With photos of Breanna in her EMT uniform and her police academy graduation photo displayed behind him, Marcus addressed the media and the city. "My name is Marcus Washington. I served this city as a police officer for 30 years. I retired as a captain. I trained many of the officers currently serving in this department." His voice was steady despite his obvious grief. 6 days ago, 5 police officers broke down my daughter's door by mistake and killed her in her own home. Breanna Washington was 26 years old. She was an EMT who dedicated her life to saving others. She had never been arrested, never been in trouble, never done anything except serve her community. The crowd of reporters was silent, recognizing the gravity of the moment. Those officers are now lying about what happened to cover up their negligence. They're claiming my daughter threatened them. They're saying she made suspicious movements. These are lies. Marcus held up a thick folder of documents. "I have evidence that Detective Ray Coleman has a pattern of serving warrants at wrong addresses. I have proof that his supervisors knew about this pattern and did nothing. I have testimony from one of the officers involved that contradicts the official story." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "I spent 30 years believing in the system. I believed that good cops would hold bad cops accountable. I believed that the badge meant something. Today, I'm asking the citizens of Detroit to demand accountability because the system I served has failed my daughter and is failing all of you." The response to Marcus's press conference would shock even him. Within hours of Marcus's press conference, protests began forming outside police headquarters, but these weren't typical anti-police protests. Many of the protesters were current and former police officers who had worked with Marcus and respected his integrity. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran, addressed the crowd. "Captain Washington trained me. He taught me that we swear an oath to protect and serve, not to cover up for bad cops. If we can't trust our own department to investigate when they kill an innocent EMT, how can we ask the public to trust us?" The protests grew daily. Current officers began calling for Coleman's resignation. Former officers shared stories of Marcus's mentorship and dedication. Medical workers from Detroit General Hospital organized their own demonstration, carrying photos of Breanna and signs reading, "She saved lives." But the most powerful moment came when Officer Mills, against direct orders from his supervisors, appeared at the protest and publicly contradicted the official story. "My name is David Mills. I was one of the officers involved in Breanna Washington's death. The official report is a lie. Breanna Washington did nothing wrong. She identified herself as a medical worker. She made no threatening movements. We killed an innocent woman and my supervisors ordered me to lie about it." Mills's testimony was broadcast live on every major news network. Within hours, the FBI announced they were launching a federal investigation into civil rights violations. The federal investigation moved quickly. With Officer Mills's testimony, Marcus's evidence, and growing pressure from the community, the cover-up unraveled rapidly. Detective Coleman was arrested on charges of civil rights violations, filing false police reports, and conspiracy. Sergeant Rodriguez faced similar charges for his role in the cover-up attempt. The other 3 officers were suspended pending investigation, but Marcus wasn't satisfied with individual prosecutions. He had uncovered evidence of systemic problems that had enabled Coleman's pattern of misconduct. Lieutenant Davis, who had overseen Coleman's unit while ignoring his pattern of mistakes, was demoted and transferred. Captain Jennifer Walsh, who had approved the rushed warrant, was forced to retire. Deputy Chief Robert Morrison, who had authorized the initial cover-up, resigned in disgrace. The city of Detroit settled with Marcus for $12 million, but Marcus donated the entire settlement to a foundation he established in Breanna's name to provide EMT training scholarships for underserved communities. Detective Coleman's trial became a national symbol of police accountability. Marcus testified about the pattern of misconduct he had uncovered. Officer Mills testified about the pressure to lie. Medical experts testified about Breanna's dedication to saving lives. The most powerful testimony came from Marcus himself when the defense attorney suggested that his investigation was motivated by revenge rather than justice. "Counselor, I spent 30 years wearing a badge. I know the difference between justice and revenge. Justice is holding people accountable for their actions, regardless of what badge they wear. Revenge would have been handling this outside the system." Marcus looked directly at Coleman as he continued. "Detective Coleman killed my daughter through negligence and then tried to cover it up with lies. If I don't fight for accountability, then what did my 30 years of service mean? What does any police officer's oath mean? Coleman was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The other officers involved received shorter sentences based on their level of cooperation with the investigation. Marcus's fight for justice led to sweeping reforms in the Detroit Police Department. The Breanna Washington Accountability Act required independent investigation of all officer-involved shootings, mandatory body cameras that could not be disabled, automatic federal review of cases involving wrong address warrants, civilian oversight of police disciplinary actions, annual pattern analysis of individual officers' use of force. Marcus was asked to join the Civilian Oversight Board, but he declined. "I've done what I needed to do for Breanna," he told the mayor. "Now I need to grieve my daughter and figure out how to live without her." 1 year after Breanna's death, Marcus stood at her grave on the anniversary of the shooting. The headstone read, "Breanna Washington, EMT. She saved lives." Officer Mills, who had lost his job but avoided prosecution due to his cooperation, approached Marcus at the cemetery. "Captain Washington, I want you to know that I think about Breanna every day. I'm going back to school to become a paramedic. I want to save lives like she did." Marcus looked at the young man who had found the courage to tell the truth, even when it cost him his career. "Mills, Breanna would be proud of that choice, and I'm proud of you for doing the right thing when it mattered most." As Mills walked away, Marcus placed fresh flowers on his daughter's grave. "Baby girl, kept my promise. I made sure your death meant something. I made sure the system changed. I just wish I could have protected you the way you protected your patients." 2 years later, Marcus received a letter from a young woman named Jessica Martinez, the first recipient of a Breanna Washington Foundation scholarship. "Mr. Washington, I wanted you to know that I graduated from EMT training today. When I put on my uniform for the first time, I thought about your daughter and her dedication to saving lives. I promise to honor her memory by serving my community with the same compassion and courage she showed every day." Marcus smiled as he read the letter. Breanna's death had been a tragedy that destroyed his world, but her legacy was saving lives through the young medical professionals who would carry on her mission. He picked up his phone and dialed Officer Mills, who was now 6 months into paramedic school. "Mills, I got another letter from one of Breanna's scholarship recipients. She's graduating next week." "That's wonderful, Captain. Breanna's still saving lives." "Yes, she is, and so will you." As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that while he would never stop grieving his daughter, he had found a way to transform that grief into something meaningful. Justice for Breanna had led to accountability for the system. Accountability had led to reform. Reform was protecting other innocent people. The badge had meant something. After all, if you believe that accountability and justice are more important than protecting bad cops, hit that subscribe button and share this story. In the comments, tell us how you think police departments can better protect innocent people. We read every comment and try to respond to as many as we can. Remember, real police work means holding each other accountable and serving the community with integrity, even when it's painful.